Welcome to Podula Rasa. I'm David Blank.
And I'm Jim Esch.
This is a podcast about finding something in nothing.
Hi, this is Jim. On today's show, we feature a conversation with creative writer Jill Benedict. For years in her 20s, Jill Benedict quit writing. Then, when COVID came knocking and we all went into self-quarantine, she clawed her way back onto the creative path. Jill reads two stories for us. The first is about the shocking reawakening of that creative process, and the second engages in a very honest way with that looming pivot point we all face, turning 30. So we're here with Jill Benedict. Jill, welcome. Jill is a writer, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your writing life. We've kind of kept in touch on and off over the years, and I sort of had the impression that for a few years in there, you sort of got away from writing for a while, and you were doing career stuff, and you were moving around and whatnot. I thought it would be interesting to explore, like, what's gotten you back into writing. How did that all happen?
Yeah. So I guess part of how I got back into it is how I kind of fell out of it. I guess that's a good place to start. After Widener, I worked for a year in retail, and then I started the MFA in fiction at Temple. And I was doing that part-time while I was working full-time. And it was at a time in my life where, looking back, there was a lot of stuff going on, just all over the place. And you know, everyone says, like, you figure out who you are in your 20s, which is true, but they also don't tell you that you have to rectify who you are and who you are becoming with who you were. And that was really a struggle for me. And so I was just in this like limbo period and unhappy and miserable. And I made it halfway through the program, so a year and a half in, and I had another year and a half to go. And I just didn't want to be there. I didn't want sort of the situation I was in with my home life and things like that. And so I was just kind of done. I just didn't want to do anything related to that. I just wanted to move on, which is something I am very guilty of, is running away from things. I ended up getting a job doing that, leaving the program. And for about 4 years, I didn't write at all. I didn't have any desire. And to be honest, I didn't even read that much. I was just, nothing interests me. And I guess in a way it kind of hurt too much, if that makes sense. I've never been a quitter, I guess. I've always been someone to follow through. And even though leaving the program was the right choice for me at the time, the program at Temple, I guess it kind of stuck with me, that feeling of just quitting, not even failure, because to be honest, like, I didn't write enough. I didn't send out anything. Like, I didn't even try. It was just the quitting factor. And whenever I tried, it just felt really unnatural and it wasn't fun. And I just didn't have anything. I didn't feel like I had anything to say. And likewise, when I tried to pick up something to read, nothing was interesting all of a sudden. I just couldn't. No plot seemed good. No character seemed that great. I just couldn't get into it. And so I didn't read or write really for about 4 years, which was really sad. But right before the pandemic hit, I started reading again slowly, because I realized that I was having trouble spelling words that I never had trouble spelling before. And I think my vocabulary had just shrunk so much because I wasn't getting all of that stimulation, I guess, that all of a sudden I couldn't spell these words, and it was terrifying to me. So I started reading again slowly. And then when the pandemic hit, when they first announced the shutdown for 2 weeks, I'm like, I just had a feeling. It's like, this is not going to last 2 weeks. Just the scale of it all, I'm like, there is no way this is going to last. And at the time, I I had moved out of Jersey and I was still working, but I was trying to like reorganize myself. And I was living with my dad and my elderly grandfather in Conshohocken. And all of my friends lived in different places. A lot of them moved out of the state, and I was feeling very isolated. And I'm like, you know what? You can approach this one of two ways. You can be sad and depressed and buy a lot of beer, which I mean, still did that from time to time. But the other option, which I really tried to focus on, was how do I take the opportunity of all this time to myself to like grow and to focus on self change and dealing with, you know, my own issues. So I did that. And I guess so that started in about March. And right before I moved to the city, it was probably June, I was reading more. And then at that point, I had, I guess, dealt with enough stuff and like sloughed through some of my demons, for lack of a better word, and just accepted a lot of things. So then when I started reading more, I started to actually enjoy it more. And I wanted to read a lot more. Maybe that was also boredom, I'm not going to lie. But so came a time where I just thought like, I wonder if I still have it. I wonder if I could, like, is it like riding a bike? Can I write and still have it be, you know, at least somewhat good? And so I started playing around with it, and I noticed that I did have it still. It wasn't, you know, I still had to refresh my memory with, you know, punctuation and dialogue formatting and things like that. But I still had the bare bones of it. And that was very exciting. And I just started to enjoy doing it, probably because no one knew I was doing it. There wasn't the pressure of the program or expectations or anything like that. It was just for me. And so when I moved to Philly, especially because even though it was July, like middle of the pandemic, I wasn't really going to make any friends. You know, conceivably, I could try, but it was really difficult. So I was trying to explore different ways to socialize. And I looked up meetups, and there's a meetup. On Meetup, there's a Shut Up and Write, which is an organization, and they have a Philly chapter. And the whole point of that is we meet a couple of times a week. And it's just about accountability. No one shares work with each other. If you choose to talk about your work, it's pretty surface level. It's more just about showing up and writing at the same time. And that was really nice to have an actual schedule. And so I could write 2 or 4 hours a week, give or take. And I started trying to write a little bit more on my own just to give myself something to do, really. And it was nice. And in the back of my head, I still had a lot of that stuff, you know, from Temple. It was still a struggle, but at least I was doing this thing. And I ended up befriending my across the hall neighbor. He moved a couple months later, but it sounds kind of bad when I say it, but it started off as a very low risk friendship. You know, when you meet someone, you know, it's like a bartender, like you're never going to see this person again, or, you know, it's pretty low stakes. So you're very honest and very candid with them. And just when we were getting to know each other, I started talking about Temple and all that stuff and my feelings around it and about writing and reading. And I don't know why it just took this outside perspective for him to be like, buddy, let it go. Like, that's not, whatever is holding you up is not a big deal. You just got to move on. And that just really helped. And so then I started doing it more intensely because I started to see a progression in my work. The more I dedicated time to it, the better it got. And it felt like I was doing better than I was doing at Temple, which was great. And I just started, I guess it was seeing that progress and seeing what actually devoting the time and energy to it that I should have been doing years ago. Seeing the kind of results that yielded was really encouraging and really exciting. And I really wanted to stick with it. And at that point, I realized that I do have something to say, so I should say it. I try to write every morning before work, a good 2 hours, hour and a half, if I can. Sometimes if I'm really overloaded with work, that doesn't happen, but I at least have my Shut Up and Write meetings where I have to do something. So yeah, it's become a really big staple, which is really great. And while this pandemic has been awful, I am very, very thankful for that, which was my very long-winded response.
How do you think your writing changed from like the point where you were in grad school and pre-pandemic, and then there was this sort of period where you weren't doing much writing at all, to then when the pandemic started and you had more time to write and you rebooted your writing life?
Mhm.
Like, do you see a change in your own writing? Like, what's different?
Mhm. I see a huge change in my own writing, which so if anything, I know that a lot of people say like, oh, you should write what you want to read, which is hard if your brain is just a vortex of, half thunk thoughts and you don't really know what's happening. And so I think a lot of it happens to do with like me coming into myself more and finally like accepting who I am and who I want to be and realizing that and having a firmer idea about what I want to see. And it sounds bad, but like catering my writing to me specifically and the things that I want to talk about and I enjoy, and just letting however it manifests, as opposed to trying to follow a very strict story arc, which is what I used to do, which isn't bad. I do like to write that way, but it can be stifling. And I think it can be hard if you aren't totally sure about what the character is doing or what the plot is. It can be kind of difficult to get it to fit in that. So there's that. And also, I think looking back, I understand the feedback and the concepts more now, having been away from it. So I remember a few notes. One note I got a few times when I was in grad school is that my characters lacked agency. And I knew what they were saying, but I couldn't figure out how to do that on the page. And now whenever I write, I'm just like, oh, duh, like that's what they meant. I get it now. And yeah. And so whenever I had feedback back then, I would just try to throw some kind of crazy plot thing in there and try to give them agency, but that's not what it is, not really. And it's only looking back that I can apply the stuff that I learned then more effectively, which was a surprise.
Well, let's hear some of your work, and maybe we'll have
Sure.
you do some post game analysis of it too. But like, what do you want to share with us?
Sure. The creative process. The creative process starts in the dark. That's what my yoga teacher says one evening as he dims the lights for Shavasana. I keep my eyes open. The last few years had not been what I had hoped, and a few months prior, tired of my once beloved transient-esque lifestyle and chasing dreams that weren't meant for me, whatever that means, I had done the smart thing and settled down following the advice of well-meaning family members. Most days it's fine. But lying corpse-like on the bamboo floor in the purple-blue hue of evening, knowing I will soon return to a house, not a home, and a life I had never wanted, I feel adrift. If I close my eyes, I will lose myself in the tide of my own tumultuous mind. The windows catch a smattering of lights from the city outside, orange, yellow, and white, and reflect them onto the ceiling. It's galactic, and for a moment, I feel like I'm on the edge of the world the way I had when I was 11 and reclining in the planetarium at the Franklin Institute. Under the dome of science, I had felt alive, inspired. The skin on the back of my neck had prickled with heat. But I'm not 11 anymore. A dense spot forms in my sternum, pinning me to my yoga mat. Is this what it feels like to be a butterfly on display? Every breath airy, but halved by a sharpness. The creative process starts in the dark. I repeat in a whisper. Now what? I can see her through the black translucent box. She hisses and paws at the air holes, hair bristling, the pink of her mouth bright against her face as she screams and smashes her split body over and over. Spit and venom, slick and viscous, she inches forward, the force of her frame propelling her prison in spontaneous bursts. 8 arms reaching toward me. She is raging. She is rage. She is not a butterfly. When I open my eyes, I grab my phone. Spider in dreams. Spirit animals. Meaning femininity, patience, creativity, fear. Your life may not align with your higher interests. If current reality doesn't suit you, change. Fuck. In the morning, I bow to the corporate gods. Glowing screen bright with emails, our scripture, buzzwords, and bullshit tumbling from monitors like the word of the Lord. Praise be the shareholders. Just call a spade a spade. Loyalty doesn't mean much when you buy it. I can walk away, I tell myself from underneath the weight of timesheets, dress codes, and approved vacation time. But I don't. Everyone says I'm overreacting. It's a good job. As if they know. As if it's a fact. The American dream. In my kitchen, I break a glass and then another, just to know I can. Scattered shards shimmer across the floor. I pull the pieces with my hands. Artificial cuts feel like control. At night, on my bed, on my body, my chest, she takes me in with her 8 obsidian eyes. A single leg moves, a question raised. My little creator. I bring her close and let her climb my cheeks. Up and over she goes into the back of my head for safekeeping, free to weave and reweave reality in the darkest corner of my mind. Spun silk draped like lace across the walls of the prison I built for us. Maybe tomorrow. The creative process starts in the dark. Fuck. She is raging. She is rage.
Love it.
Thank you. So this one, it comes into play, I guess, towards the middle of the piece. But I actually, the dream that I talk about, I did have. And, I have a lot of wonky dreams. But I woke up in the morning and I'm like, I need to unpack this. And I was in like this abandoned shed and it was huge. And just a pair of hands puts this box in front of me. And I just see this tarantula just shaking this box, trying to escape. And she was coming at me. And I freaked out and I screamed and she screamed. And I like kicked the box and it went somewhere off screen. And I woke up and I'm like, okay, well, that seems a little on the nose. Something is repressed. I feel like I'm repressed and I feel like my subconscious is definitely telling me that. So I did some research, the research that I talk about here, and I was like, you're kidding me. You can't. And it was at a time where I was feeling very stifled and very stressed out in my life. And like I was having heart palpitations and I just felt very, I guess, angsty, I'm going to say. And so I was like, wow, if that's not my subconscious telling me something, I don't know what is. So I don't know if I so much believe in spirit animals, but that's a fun thing that I like to look into. And you can have multiple spirit animals, apparently. And so I've been afraid of spiders my whole life, which is, I've gotten easier over time. But so seeing one in my dream, especially one so mad, I'm like, that's okay. So come to find out that because spiders are weavers, they're associated with creativity and all that stuff. And then, if the spider's upset in your dream, that's, bad. And I just like, I gotta write about this. I gotta do something with this. I like how it turned out.
Yeah, I think it worked out really well because when you cut to the dream, there's extra space in the story. There's like a section break, right? Mm-hmm. Where you say, I can see her through the black translucent box, right? And it's one of those nice jumps that we get in a good mm-hmm. story where we're kind of like, whoa, we're then in like something else now, right? And then we, as a reader, like you sort of realize pretty soon mm-hmm. after that it is a dream, but it's the way you sort of injected that and embedded it in the middle of that scene was well mm-hmm. done, because I just felt like you weren't so explicit about it, but it was clear that this came out of a dream. I also like how it kind of goes from the butterfly to the spider,
Yeah.
right? I really like where the story landed too. Like, just she is raging, she is rage, which I realized when you read it is sort of mentioned earlier in the story. You repeat it,
Yeah.
right? But it
Oh no, yeah. I was a little worried about repeating it, but it just felt necessary, I guess, in a way, because so much about it to me is about repression, and I have realized over the last couple of years that I have a little bit of a hair trigger.
What do you mean?
I get angry really quickly, but I do like repress that. And I think a lot of it is just I'm learning how low my tolerance is for, like, frankly, bullshit. And I just, I believe in, the gray area, and I understand when things need to be fluid or things like that. But if something is what it is, just call it what it is. And then that's, a whole thing in itself. And then to be in a position where I'm frankly, like, repressing myself creatively is so frustrating. And I just feel like unchecked, it just creates this undercurrent of rage. Yeah, because nothing is ever truly resolved at the end. And I think that's why I like it.
Even though it's kind of there's sort of a darkness to the story, and there's definitely sort of menacing quality. But I found it somehow, I don't know if the word's liberating or uplifting isn't the right word, but when you said the creative process starts in the dark, like, the creative process is starting in the story. And that is like a good thing.
Yeah, it's that kind of, was it general, I don't want to say idea, but I guess it is the general idea that, not that this is what's happening, but when you hit bottom, there's nowhere to go but up. And there is a silver lining in the darkness. Like, all right, this is awful and frustrating and I hate it. And what am I going to do? And it's like, well, move forward. What else are you going to do? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a silly little side thing, but I do know that it's dark and it's a little jarring, I think, at times, and frankly, a little violent. And this sounds a little weird to say, I guess, but because I know how I look and how I come off to people, I really like the juxtaposition of how violent it is and how hard compared to me. So even though when I first read this piece, I'm like, I don't know if anyone's going to really care, like it the way I like it. And then I was like, oh, who cares? I like it and I'm going to read it. And I didn't really think about it as being very personal until an hour before I read it at my community drafts. And I'm like, oh, well, there's no turning back now.
Yeah, it seems like a really brave piece to me, because it was triggered by this dream you had, and then, which was sort of disturbing and everything, but then you sort of plowed right into it. Like, as a writer, you sort of dove into that angstiness.
Yeah.
And you made something like really remarkable.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. It hit home. I loved it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Let's talk about the next story, On Turning 30. Is this still a fragment? It's called On Turning 30, a fragment.
Yeah, I left a fragment there because at the time I don't really know what it is. And so hearkening to the Wordsworth aspect in it, a fragment, I'm like, yeah, let's call it a fragment. Sure. It kind of feels unfinished, but I mean, it's finished. Like, it's still relatively raw. You're the only one who's seen it, but it is what it is.
All right, let's hear you read it, and then
Okay.
we'll ask you to comment on
All
it.
right. On turning 30, a fragment. I will turn 30 on Friday, September 3rd. As I reflect on the past 5, 10, 15 years, I realize how far I've come from the girl I once was. It's for the best. That girl who pranced around the backyard like a horse and stayed up all night reading picture books, too afraid of the dark to sleep and pinching together the pages with the spiders on them lest they come alive, would not survive in this world. In fact, I can only think of 2 ways in which I envy her. 1, she was hopeful. I tried, but seem to have lost some of that over the years. That's not unique to me, though. Everyone wants to hold on to their young, wild hope clusterfucking around, believing in the notion that everything that is meant to be will be. It's bred into us. But that doesn't make the Friday after work at a job you hate IPA taste any better. Now, in the fading din of evening, coddling babies and fur babies alike, it's just a shortcut to acceptance. Maybe that's not so bad. Not everyone can get what they want. Even fewer get what they need. 2, she was present. Every day used to unfold in front of me like a zebra plant holding its cool, green-striped hands out to the world. The day was what it was, and in the evening I would tuck myself into bed and I would remember everything. How one line in the photosynthesis diagram I had memorized and recreated on the back of my chest curved to the right because my hand had slipped. How the tread of my brother's sneakers squeaked in that universal high-pitched rubber-on-rubber squeak when he stopped and the basketball came down, busting his lip open, and how there was blood everywhere. How the chocolate water ice at Plymouth Swim Club had tiny chocolate chips in it and felt softer in my mouth than the lemon. How the Norton Anthology of English Literature, the Romantic Period, edition 8, volume D, uses the 1815 version of I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, not the 1807, which I like better. How both versions resonate with my own deep, inaudible hum. I sense it the way you sense saturation in the morning air, wet earth, when you feel alive, animal. How it's not about the fucking daffodils. Things mesh together now. The boundaries between our flimsy and the poems the same. Things I knew, heard, feelings, ideas, prayers, depression, anxiety, all bleed into one another like watercolors. It's hard to retain new information. I'm out of practice. Perhaps because, like Wordsworth, I too have spots of time that I return to again and again. Where he used his for inspiration, I use mine to hide. While everyone else was building a life, a future, I stalked through old memories looking for safety, security, and more often than not, you. If I could find the right one and if it was quiet and I could focus. The hair on your arms long but soft under my fingertips when I reached across the table in excitement and grabbed you. Your ugly square-toed dress shoes, clown shoes. The orange streetlights draped over us like a blanket covering the lovers we had wanted to be when you lifted me up on the South Street Bridge. Losing my favorite ring and all of the kissing and touching. If I could rebuild the memory as detailed as possible, maybe I could go back. I could do things differently, or at least relive them exactly as they had happened. If alternate realities exist simultaneously to ours, backs against one another, if indeed anything is possible, why can't I will myself through the barrier of space and time to get back to you? You were hopeful too. You were present too. For when I lay on my couch in vacant or in pensive mood, you flash upon my inward eye. There is no bliss in my solitude. There is love, pain, confusion, and all of the things I had never said to you, including, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I did not understand. I was afraid. But there is no going back to you, to the woman I was 10, 5, 2 years ago when you had told me that you felt like you were on fire when you were with me. I don't blaze, I smolder, another thing I never said. Or to the girl I once was who thought that falling in love would be simple, clean. No hiding, just 30. The big 30. Dirty 30, 30, flirty and thriving. Acceptance. Maybe it won't be so bad. I may not have gotten what I wanted, but if I'm lucky, I might get what I need.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece, and there's just seems to be a lot of wisdom in there, like that comes from like a lot of hard experience. I'm just curious, what was the genesis of this piece for you?
So I think, like the previous one, sort of there were two starting points. So the first one is I love a good like declaration. So just that first line of "I'm going to be 30 on Friday, September 3rd." I just think there's something so empowering about that and accepting about that kind of declaration. And I know that it's, specific to me, but everyone has those instances in life where you just know and accept and just acknowledge a thing for what it is. And I love that. And I think that's where I started like the piece specifically, because I was writing it for this one I was writing specifically for the community drafts, which I ended up missing because I was out of town. But I was like, all right, 5 minutes, what are we going to do? But a lot of the other stuff I backfilled, and in the back of my mind for a couple of days, I had that section about for oft when on my couch I lie. I can't remember how I was looking into it. I think I was using the Norton Anthology to hold my iPad on one day. And while I had it, I occasionally flipped through the Wordsworth stuff because, I studied him a lot when I was in undergrad. And I know that there's the fourth stanza, "I wander lonely as a cloud," is the one that's most commonly used. And while I was flipping through it, I remembered that I have a Penguin edition that I found at a random bookstore in Ohio. And I purchased specifically because it has the three stanza, the 1807. And I was so excited because the fourth stanza is good, but I think the addition of the fourth stanza just didn't add very much. So I guess I just had that in the back of my mind for a couple of days. And then I had that little ditty about like, I guess that paragraph just about like me and my pensive mood just kind of came together. It was very easy to like manipulate his words to fit my needs. And I just kind of backfilled everything in a really weird, almost like it's not a very straightforward piece. I guess, but it just kind of ended up that way. It was very natural. And then at the end, I just kind of looked at it and I was like, well, I don't know what this is, but I like it.
I think in a lot of ways, it's very straightforward. It feels very whole to me.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. Because I feel like if I were to ever explain how my brain works, it would be like this. Like I swear there's a common thread in there. You just got to let me get to it.
Well, luckily writers don't have to explain that, right? All you have to do is write it and then let other people figure that out. That's always been my attitude. But yeah, it was very moving, this piece. Like it almost choked me up. Like it was sort of, because I remember one of the hardest years of my life was 29. When I was 29, turning 30, 29, 30, 31 in there. Yeah, you're there now, right? Just sort of, there was something very big about 29. Like I don't know what it was. What is it for you?
I guess the struggles of being 29 is really, to be honest, like a lot of what I said earlier, like, oh, they're kind of nonfiction pieces with fictitious elements. I really do feel like things have just been blurring together more and I can't think straight a lot more. And that is its whole other thing. But I think a lot of it too, like what I brought in with, a lot of people around me settling down and having kids and things like that, wonderful things. But I believe I've said this to you in an email before. I don't feel like I've ever been anyone who knew explicitly what I wanted. And so being at 29 and being surrounded by people who just very clearly know what they want, and I'm just here like a big shrug, is really difficult. And trying to figure out my life and then having people ask me questions. I think you asked me what my 5-year plan is. And I'm like, that's funny. because so much of it is just in flux for me. And I feel like a lot of it's been that way ever since I graduated college, which was also a struggle just because I remember, it's funny when everyone was excited to graduate from undergrad, and I was filled with dread because for 22 years of your life, you follow this trajectory and everyone's like, this is your plan. And then they're just like, great, good job, bye. And you're just like in the ether. And everyone tells you, the things you should do, but no one tells you how to do them really in a real way. And I thought that's something that would get better with time, and it did not. And so at 29, I guess the biggest thing is I'm trying to really figure out what I want in life, like truly, like for me, not so much what is expected of me, what I might possibly want, like deep down on my deathbed, when I'm looking back at the end of things, what do I want? And that's really hard. It's more, I guess, just this daily small occurrences of like existential dread.
Yeah, that's what 29 feels like. Yeah, that's well said. But it was like a transitional time. And I was like, I guess there's something about going to the next decade where you feel like, well, I better get my shit together because I don't know what the hell I want to be or what I want to do with my life.
Yeah.
And I didn't figure that out. Like at 29, it didn't happen. It never happens on a schedule. Like maybe for some people it does, but it's like I never felt I was on a track. I was always kind of off the track in the margins somewhere. But when you get to that mark, like that 29 going to 30, it's like you take stock, I guess, and you start to think, oh, and then there's all these other people doing their thing, having families, getting married, like buying houses, some of them, like, and I wasn't there yet.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, I think, because a lot of people assume that it's the things like, oh, how do I want to put this? I think the easiest way for people to digest the idea is that, when I see people like that, I'm like wishing I had the house or the kids or things like that. And they're like, oh, well, you'll find your way. And that's not actually what I envy. I envy the certainty that they make these decisions. Cause like you, I've drifted from job to job and I'm trying to figure things out. And I guess at 30, especially in the job market, it's assumed that you're on a track. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to be on a track. I don't know if I want to commit to anything like that. If I wanted to commit, I would have kept my condo in New Jersey. Like, no, I sold it. I don't want that. That's where I'm at in my life, where I'm just ticking off what I don't want to do and ending up with a process of elimination. So that's where I guess I'm at right now. And especially since I started writing more and I'm like, oh, I think I want to pursue this in some aspect. I don't know how that's going to pan out. I have had to recognize like, okay, it's a long game.
It is.
And that's okay. You don't have to figure it out. You'll be fine. And of course there's this voice in the back of my head and I'm like, oh, but are people always fine? And I'm like, no, but we will make sure we're fine. Like it'll work out. But it's hard. How do people just know what they want? And then even then, there's a part of me that is definitely fearful that if I figure it out, I will feel like a sense of discontent just because I'm like, cool, I got my thing. And then so this is it. Like, I guess I need the chase. And maybe I do that. It could be very possible that I facilitate this for myself, this chase for myself. Because if not, then what? What do you just live happily? I don't want to do that. I don't want to just wake up and not worry about anything.
But I think you just have to kind of almost go by feel, and you just like if you go with the flow with what you're interested in now and what you derive enjoyment from, and just kind of explore that. And it's a lot of it is like we think about what we should be doing, or we start comparing ourselves to other people. And the less you do of that, I think the better. It's
Yeah.
just like follow your own path
Mhm.
wherever it might lead. And as long as you're making a living and you're
Mhm.
not starving and you're not homeless, you're
Yeah.
probably going to be fine.
Yeah, which is good because I mean, I've never been very motivated by money, which is awesome. It's very freeing to just like, as long as I can pay my bills, I don't care.
Right. What do you think with this girl in the story, the 11-year-old? What would she want to say to you? You say one, she was hopeful, and two, she was present. Are these things that you want to kind of get back, or are they sort of irretrievably lost? Is that just part of childhood, and we have to kind of get used to not being hopeful or present?
So present, I would very much like to get back to. And part of that, I think, is just being an adult because you're being pulled in so many directions naturally. That's just hard to enjoy things and not even enjoy things, like not even just be present as a picnic, but just like my memory used to be so sharp. I used to remember everything and I'm just not here anymore. I'm always elsewhere. And especially I'm someone who's like chronic overthinker. So that doesn't help. Thus the story. But so that's something I would like to get back to. And I think I definitely can. It's just a matter of being mindful about it, which is tough to break those cycles. And then hopeful, I do think I would like to be more hopeful, but it's a different kind of hopeful when you're an adult versus when you're a child, I think. I think when you're hopeful as a child, you're hopeful for this future you. It's the possibility that kind of makes you hopeful of the anything. And that even if you understand there are restrictions, there's still this sense of like, well, you never really know what's going to happen. And perhaps that's why 30, 29, 31 is such a tricky age because, conceivably, knock on wood, a quarter of your life has passed. So those possibilities are getting smaller and smaller. So you kind of have to reframe the hope now. And I think now it's more having hope in myself and what I can do. And that has been something that I've had to learn in my 20s. There have been instances where I've struggled with low self-esteem, low self-worth, like a lot of people. And like knowing on a level that I can do something, but just not really believing that it would work out for me. And I think some of that has to do with the kind of culture we live in, especially with social media. It kind of frames things so that it's a very nonfiction way to look at things. Like someone was destined to be this way and this thing, which just kind of feeds into that whole, imposter syndrome. Like, all right, well, I didn't start writing till I was 16. And then I hear all these people start writing when they're 4 and we're always into it. And I'm like, well, maybe I'm not a writer. So then over your 20s, I feel like or your 20s, anyone's 20s, learning to become more self-aware of your own limits of what you can do. And also learning that while people may have your best interests in heart, that looks a lot like their best interest and their idea about what your life should be. And I think that's something people know conceptually, but it's one thing to know it as an idea and one thing to actively recognize it and to take steps to follow your gut and to trust yourself. And I think that's where the hope sort of comes in. I hope you're doing the right thing for yourself.
Right. Well, if it's any comfort, my 30s, I think were in some ways happier than my 20s. Like if you go by decades.
All right. That is comfort.
I think when I got into my 30s, I just started worrying less about the things I was worried about in the 20s. And then like the older I got, the more I started to cut away people who were sort of making me feel not good about myself too. Like that starts to happen as well. You get separation from some of the more toxic elements. But I actually had a question about coming back to the 20s. Like a lot of people tell me that 25 is a tough age. And was that a tough age for you? Like people call it your quarter life crisis or something.
Yeah. maybe that's just the age where everyone starts to feel the pressure that later comes into play at 29, where you're being forced to reevaluate,
Right.
not forced, but unconsciously you evaluate things and where you're going. And that's where you do start to see friends settle down with long-term partners, and some of them buy homes
Right.
and all. I think it might be the first time where you're kind of confronted with your like mortality and the trajectory of your life.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I was 25, I didn't have that quite. I think that's more, I don't know if it breaks down by gender or not, but I don't think people were talking about 25 back in the day like that, like they do now. But it could also be that I was just sort of medicating myself out of even thinking about 25. Like I was drinking a lot, and
I feel that.
Yeah, it was just like I was forgetting a lot of stuff back then, and then it starts to catch up to you as you get into like your later 20s and into your 30s, and then you have to change.
Yeah,
that
resonates with me a lot.
Yeah. So, but like coming back to your piece, I think what you just sort of nail the angst and the kind of, there's a sense of loss in there, like there's a sort of sadness about not only the lost childhood, but then the lost relationship too. Like you can't, it's like, you can't get that back. Right. It's just sort of, and yet that it's, there's just a lot of sorrow, I guess, coming off that piece.
Yeah. It's, I know a lot of people say, you got to move forward, life goes on, yada, yada, yada. But, and of course I feel that way. That's like a healthy mindset, but it's so much easier said than done. And like I said before, like I am an overthinker, and I do get stuck in these vortexes of like these memories, which is not helpful. But they're kind of a safe space for me, even when they are sad, probably because I know what happens. And even though people tell you to move on and to accept things, I think I'm of the camp where like, you don't really ever forget, you don't ever really get over some things, you just learn to live with them. And it is kind of mind-boggling to me that the memories that we do have, if you revisit them, like had things only been a little different, how would that have changed? Like things, even if they got worse, like there's still just the chances of things happening the way they do. And I don't know, I just find myself circling back to them, because if only one thing had been different, something small, that's crazy to think about. Memories are kind of like life rafts, especially when, by the time you're 30, 40, 50, it feels like you've lived 5, 6, 7 times over. So to know that you were through those experiences, there's something, I don't know, comforting about that.
Well, good luck with your writing, and I'll be reading more of your stuff. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This is fun.
It was fun. Hope we do it again.
Yeah, I hope to do it again soon.
Thank you, Jill Benedict, for sharing your stories with us. Pagula Rasa is produced by Jim Esch and Dave Blank. You can find the podcast on Anchor.fm, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other major podcast directories. We hope you will share the podcast with your friends and followers. Our website is padularasa.com. To send feedback, email us at padularasa@gmail.com. As always, thanks for listening.